Hi everyone, welcome to Aussizz Conclave 4.0. We hope that you are excited to know all about DAMA programs. I would like to introduce Mr. Tejas Patel, migration agent. Let me give you a brief overview about him. Tejas, as a seasoned registered migration agent, is recognized for his expertise in navigating Australian immigration process. Having been an international student from India in 2007, he is dedicated to assisting individuals in settling, working, and studying in Australia. His specialization lies in skilled visas, employer sponsored visas, and partner visas, when he provides tailored solution to each and every client with their unique needs. His empathetic approach and unwavering dedication ensures that his clients receive accurate and current advice. Beyond professional endeavors, he engages in community outreach initiate to raise awareness about immigration rights. Witnessing his clients' success stories brings him immense fulfillment and motivation to remain committed to guiding individuals and families through the complexities of Australian immigration for a seamless transition of life in Australia. That's all, folks. Relax and enjoy the session. You are in a good hands now. Let's get started. I'll hand it over to Tejas now. Thank you.
All right. So, yes, in this session, we'll be covering up a very in-demand topic, which is the DAMA programs, and especially with a lot of immigration changes and the state nominations getting harder. One of the key elements and one of the key programs most of the skilled migrants can look into is also the employer-sponsored, and DAMA program is part of the employer-sponsored in a broader range. So what is employer-sponsored visa? Employer-sponsored visa allows skilled overseas workers to live, work in Australia for their nominated employer for a certain period of time. So the period of time can be anything from 1 year up to 5 years, depending on what visa subclass you apply for. So 482 or 494, depending if you're covering up the labor agreement, then you can apply up to 5 years in 494. If you're only applying the standard 482s, then you can apply for up to 1 year to up to 4 years. So employer-sponsored visa covers a lot of occupations which are normally not available in the skilled migration as well. Skilled migration means the GSM, the 189 visas, 190 visas, and 491 visas. So the applicants are required to have certain qualification and experience in order to be eligible for the employer-sponsored visa. So they need to be having at least minimum of 1 year, 2 years, or up to 3 years in some cases in order to apply for the employer-sponsored visa, depending on which subclass they are targeting for. In today's sessions for the DAMA, we'll be covering up the visa 482 and 494, which are the temporary visas, and then it leads towards the permanent visas. So when we talk about 482s, how many different visa subclasses are there for the 482s? So there are main two visa subclasses, as in the visa streams, which is the short-term stream and the long-term stream. If we talk about short-term stream, that's only for 2 years. Long-term stream is for the 4 years. So it depends on what occupation you're applying for. You can nominate yourself, as in the employer can nominate you for the 482 visas for up to 4 years. Giving you an example, let's say if you're a cook, then you can only apply for the 482 for 2 years, whereas if you're a chef, then you can apply up to 4 years. So depending on what occupations you are falling under, and if that occupation is under the short-term list or medium to long-term list, then you can apply between 2 to 4 years. And as I mentioned earlier, under the labor agreement, under the 482 visas, you can apply up to 4 years as well. So 4 years standard for the 482 labor agreement, which is also part of the DAMA. What is DAMA? DAMA is a designated area migration agreement. So any particular area where there is a skill shortage, they will negotiate an agreement with Department of Home Affairs to sponsor certain occupations. How it happens is basically, let's say a council speak to different employers, different businesses in their areas, understand what is the skill migration requirements. So let's say they've spoken to a mining company, or they've spoken to a childcare or a restaurant, and then they understand that what are the occupations which are in demand, and they can't fulfill those demands from the local workforce. So they need to come up with some kind of program which is not readily available under the standard migration programs. So they will create a special agreement which will be negotiated further with Department of Home Affairs, and then they will enter into an agreement called DAMA. Once the agreement is executed, it's valid for next 5 years. So they will be able to use that agreement for 5 years. However, the employer needs to negotiate the nomination numbers every 12 months. So they need to plan their workforce requirements every 12 months, and then they will be able to nominate certain number of employees for their businesses. Now, the DAMA can be an area specific, or eventually the government wants to be a state specific. What that means, let's say Western Australia has 3 different DAMAs. Now they want to consolidate to one DAMA, which is WA DAMA. So they will be basically coming up with a different agreement, which will be locked with the postcodes that only certain occupation can be sponsored in only certain postcodes. But then there will be only one DAMA, which could be potentially called WA DAMA, instead of 3 different DAMAs in one state. So just to streamline and make the whole process easier, they will come up with eventually the state-oriented DAMA programs rather than a council-specified or an area-specified DAMA programs. Benefits of 482 or 494 through DAMA, a much broader list, which is normally not available under the normal 482s or 494s. Giving you example, all the skill level 4 works, such as childcare worker, aged care worker, disability worker, truck drivers, in some cases, hospitality workers, such as front of house or supervisor. All these occupations are not currently available in any of the skill migration or normal 482 or 494. They can only be sponsored under the 482 or 494 DAMA agreements. So you have much more flexibility in terms of choosing the occupation. So you can use a lot of semi-skilled occupation. So you don't really need to be a skill level 1 or 2 occupation. It can be skill level 4 occupation where you can use this under the DAMA programs. Normally, at least 3 years of work experience required under the normal 482, but in DAMA, you only need 1 year experience. So let's say if you are an aged care worker, if you want to get sponsored under an aged care or disability care worker DAMA programs, then you only need 1 year experience in order to be applying for this visa. Whereas if you apply for the normal 494, any occupation such as chef, you require to have 3 years of experience for 494 as well. So you get that experience exemption in order to use the DAMA programs more flexibility in regards to that. You also need to be skilled to apply for your DAMA programs. So you need to have at least 1 year experience. So that's the minimum compared to 2 years or 3 years for the standard programs. So you have an experience exemptions and you have the qualification exemptions under the DAMA programs as well. Next slide, please. All right. So what is DAMA and labor agreement? As I covered, DAMA is a 2-tier framework covering up different process. So in the DAMA, there are 4 different stages. Stage 1 would be the labor agreement, but then also in the labor agreement, they also need to go through a labor market testing. And before that, as long as they have done the labor market testing, they also need to go through a DAR endorsement. So DAMA is 2-tier process where one is an agreement between the local government, and the second one is an agreement with the federal government, basically. So when I say DAR endorsement, DAR means designated area representative, which means if I talk about a DAMA program in South Australia, then South Australian government will be acting as a DAR, and they need to be endorsing the business in order to apply for the further labor agreement federally. So as long as you can get an endorsement from the local government, then only you can apply for your federal government labor agreement. If you do not have endorsement, you cannot apply for your labor agreement under the DAMA programs. So before you go with the DAR endorsement, you need to meet certain requirements, which is in general 12 months of business operation in regional. So wherever the employer is based, they need to be at least 12 months old business. And also they need to have at least 28 days of labor market testing done, which means they need to advertise in the local and nationally reached different websites to make sure they are doing everything they can to find the right skilled staff members for that particular business. And then they are having a case where they can't find anyone locally. That's why they're sponsoring someone who is on a temporary visa, either in Australia or someone who is overseas right now. Once the DAR endorsement is done, then we can apply for the labor agreement with the federal government. Once federal government approves the labor agreement, then the applicant can apply for the nomination for the visa applicant. When I say applicant, the business. So business can apply for the nomination for the visa applicant, and then the last stage is the visa application for the visa holder. So that's 2-tier stage process. What is the difference between DAMA and labor agreement? So DAMA is area specific, whereas labor agreement can be multiple stream, such as company specific, industry specific, or program specific. So if you talk about aged care industry specific agreement, which we have, I think, covered up in early session today's conclave, it also gives you flexibility in terms of any aged care employer sponsoring temporary visa holders for their business as an aged care worker. but that is only specific to the aged care employers. They cannot use this particular agreement for any other businesses or any other occupations. But in DAMA, you have list of 100, 200, 250 occupations, depending on which DAMA you're using for. And the businesses can sponsor more than one occupations as long as the business has a genuine requirement. However, in the company specific or in the industry specific, it depends on what's negotiated previously with the government. So there are preset occupations they can sponsor and use that particular agreement. In industry aged care agreement, there are only 3 occupations such as nursing support worker or age or disability care workers. So they cannot sponsor any other occupations in the industry-specific the aged care agreement. But in DAMA, they can sponsor, depending on what's occupation list, they can sponsor more than 100, 200, or 250 occupations. As long as your occupation falls under the list of DAMA occupation, you meet the requirement, then your employer who is based in that particular region and meet all the other requirements, they can sponsor you for the DAMA. Yep. So, and then the key features for DAMA. Yep. That's the key feature is obviously the regional focus. So DAMA typically is not available under metropolitan cities such as Melbourne, Sydney, or Brisbane. It's primarily regional focus. So the intention of DAMA was to support the regional based employers for their staffing requirements. So it is not normally available under the Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane businesses, but they can explore other labor agreements such as company-specific labor agreement or industry-specific labor agreement. So if any aged care companies based in Melbourne or Sydney want to sponsor aged care workers, they cannot sponsor under DAMA. They can sponsor under the industry-specific labor agreement, which is a separate process. Second part is obviously the broader occupation list, which I've covered. In most of the DAMAs, you see there are 12 DAMAs across Australia, and all of them has at least 100 plus occupations available on the list, which means you have much greater flexibility in terms of what occupations are there for you to use in regards to the DAMA occupation list. And also there are greater concessions available as well. So which means you can have lesser experience, lesser English requirements as well, and you have an age concession up to 55 years as well. Under the typical normal 482 employer-sponsored visa, you cannot apply for your permanent visa if you're over 45, whereas in DAMA, you can have an age exemption and you can apply for your 482 to 186 or 494 to 191 until you are 55 years of age. So you have age exemption, which is also one of the key factors for a lot of skilled applicants who might have a lot of experience, but because of the age issues, they cannot apply for their permanent visas. So they can explore definitely DAMA programs. It's much more flexible for them. And as I said earlier, the skill and the experience requirement is quite low as well compared to the other standard programs. So you only have 1 year requirements in most of the occupations under DAMA compared to 2 years or 3 years under the different programs. Now, in November, government is also changing the standard 482s to 1 year. So obviously that's going to be beneficial for all the applicants, but they're not going to include all the semi-skilled occupation in those changes, which means if you are working in the semi-skilled or low-skilled occupation of group level 3 and 4, skill level 4 occupations, then you need to explore the DAMA program if you want to get sponsored and get a permanent residency in Australia. The pathway to permanent residency, which is one of the crucial and most important for all the temporary migrants. So you do have a pathway to 186 or 191 under the DAMA program. So you do get permanent residency after 3 years. Labor agreements need to be entered between the company and the federal government. The state government or DAR, the designated area representative, is just a mediatory authority which endorses that business. The further labor agreement will be executed between Department of Home Affairs and that particular entity which is sponsoring you, the company. Community and economic benefits, obviously, because of meeting the skills requirement, this will definitely help in terms of the regional communities where there is a greater shortage of childcare workers, cook, chef, any other occupation, especially transport. So right now, the truck drivers is also available in DAMA programs, which means if you're working in a regional South Australia or regional Australia in general, where there is a DAMA program, your occupation could be there for the jobs you might be doing in metropolitan area, but there is no pathway to PR. So you can find jobs in regional, move to regional, and then see if you can get a sponsorship through that particular employer where you're working it can lead you towards a permanent residency. Occupation scope. So standard 482, obviously, as I said earlier, there are two occupation lists they use, which is STSOL and MLTSOL. So MLTSSL and STSOL are the standard list where they can apply for 482 between 2 years to 4 years. Whereas in DAMA, the occupation list goes on quite a large number. And they can also be added every year because the DAR, the designated area representative, they do ongoing consultation with the businesses in their area to understand what is the skill demand for those areas. And then they will add or remove certain occupations. That's why there is South Australia DAMA, but then there is a greater shortage of particular occupation in regional South Australia, then they can add those particular occupations. But if there is no enough shortage, as in there's no shortage for certain occupations in Adelaide or regional as well, then they can also remove that particular occupation because it doesn't require anymore to be in that particular list. So this can be done ongoingly by DAR, the designated area representative. They can add or remove the occupations with the industry consultations and with the approval from Department of Home Affairs. So you can have obviously much larger occupation access in the DAMA program compared to the normal STSOL or MLTSSL. Eligibility for DAMA is also much lower compared to normal 482 or 494 because, as I said, only 1 year experience compared to 2 years in 482. And even in 482 normal 2 years, you need to be permanent full-time or permanent part-time, whereas in DAMA, some of the occupation only requires 20 hours a week, and they do consider casual employment as well, as long as the hours are fixed. So you have greater flexibility in terms of your employment in order to be eligible for your DAMA program. Standard 482 programs cannot lead you towards permanent residency if your occupation is in the short-term list. But in general, the DAMA program leads you towards 186 or 191 after 3 years. So you can apply for your permanent visa even if your occupation is in the lower skill side as well, because there is already an exemption approved. There is already a condition negotiated with the Department of Home Affairs that this occupation will lead towards a permanent residency. So then only it will be under the list available for the employers to access and sponsor. Difference between the normal 482 and DAMA. So standard pathways for the normal 482 is obviously 186. DAMA includes more flexible occupations. Government collaboration is also higher in DAMA because they do manage the DAMA program depending on the industry requirements and depending on the particular region requirements as well. DAMA is developed through collaboration between Australian government, regional authorities, and also the region-specific needs. So there is a Kalgoorlie DAMA. Let's just give you an example. So then the council will actually understand what is the requirements of their businesses only in that region, and then they will come up with that occupation list. Whereas under the 482 nationally, it comes with the national consultations. So not all the occupation which the Kalgoorlie DAMA employers required will be there in the list. But when the DAMA list will be decided by the council there, then they will be deciding the occupation required by the businesses which are operating in that particular region only. So it's much more closer collaboration with the industry stakeholders for the employer-sponsored program compared to a normal 482 visa program. The normal 482 now leads towards the permanent residency as well. So that's good news for all the applicants, especially November onwards. You'll be having more flexibility with 1 year experience also accepted for your 482 to 186. So you have, if you are having a full-time job and you have an employer who can sponsor, you should definitely consider doing the 482 either through normal stream or DAMA particular streams as well. There are 12 different DAMAs available throughout Australia. So here's a list of DAMAs. I won't be reading all of them, but then it based out of different states such as Western Australia, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, Northern Territory. So you have access except I think Tasmania and ACT. And yeah, Tasmania and ACT, all of them has DAMA, especially Queensland also have 2 DAMAs. So there are 12 different DAMA programs currently available across Australia. So depending on where you are working, or if you're getting an employer who is operating in any of those areas, you can explore your pathway towards PR through these DAMA programs. So what's the minimum requirements for, in general, the 482s, the 494, or the DAMAs? The occupation can be skilled or semi-skilled in DAMA, whereas under the 482 or 494, it has to be skilled only, which means most of the occupation requires a bachelor degree, a diploma, or certificate 3, and experience, whereas in DAMA, it can go to certificate skill level 4, and some cases skill level 5 as well, such as machine operator. So LMT requires, so when I say LMT means labor market testing. So the employer, the applicant who is nominating you as a visa holder or visa applicant will require to do a labor market testing. In the normal 482s, they need to be doing the LMT within last 4 months, whereas in DAMA, the LMT can be last 12 months. So there is much more flexibility in terms of when could be the last LMT done in order to use the employer-sponsored programs under the DAMA. The location for 482s can be anywhere in Australia, but for 494, it can be only regional Australia, whereas in DAMA, it's an area specific. Age limit, there is no age limit for 482, but then to apply for the 186 after 482, you need to be under 45 years. For the 494, the age limit is 45, but under DAMA, it can be up to 55 for the permanent visa for 186 and 191 both. So you have the age exemption in DAMA as well. English also, there is an English exemptions for vocational to functional English, which is only 4.5. It can also be similar for the permanent residency as well for 186 and 191. So you have English exemption in the future. Skill assessment depends on what's your occupation. In some cases, the designated area representative, which is DAR, can do your skill assessment at no cost. So such as aged care workers. Let's say South Australia does the skill assessment for age or disability care workers. They don't charge any fees for your skill assessment. So you have that flexibility when you use the DAMA programs in any of these available programs as well. Experience requirement for the standard 482s right now is 2 years, but under the 482 DAMAs is only 1 year. So you have that exemption in terms of the experience as well. Now, one of the key thing is also the TSMIT, temporary skilled migration income threshold, which is currently at $70,000. In DAMA, you have 10% TSMIT exemption, which means the employer can pay minimum $63,000 in some occupations compared to standard $70,000. Now, this is changing from 1st of July to $73,150. Now, the DAMA program will still have 10% exemption, which means the minimum salary will be only around $66,000. So some occupation, I can understand the employer cannot pay you more than $73,000 plus super. But then if they are based in regional where there is DAMA program, they can explore this particular option where they can apply for the TSMIT exemption, and it can give them 10% off in terms of the salary requirements. So it is a great way to make sure that they use the program more efficiently. Permanent residency, as I covered earlier, the age exemption is there, so you can apply up to the age of 55. Experience requirement is standard, 2 years for the 482 to 186, or 3 years for the 494 to 191. But in DAMA, unfortunately, because you're using the age or salary exemption or the skill exemption, you need to work with the same employer for at least 3 years before you can apply for your permanent visa. English, you don't need English for 191, but you do need English for 186. But in DAMAs, there is an exemption available as well, which can be negotiated on occupation to occupation. As I covered earlier, 186, it's changing. So the TSMIT is changing to $73,000 minimum from 1st of July. This is covering up the occupation. This is for 186 direct entry. So we don't need to cover that particular occupation itself. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in today's session.
Thank you, Tejas. Thank you for providing all the information for DAMA programs. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.